Like all quarterbacks, Brady Cook should stay in college as long as he possibly can. I'll explain what I mean coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail, you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and a man who probably needs to cancel his On3 subscription. Missed it by that much. But you know what? Coming up on today's program, a comment I made respecting Texas A&M's pass rush yesterday was actually taken as an insult somehow by a bunch of Texas A&M fans. So I'll talk about that later on the program. I do want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I have to say, I think the paradigm is starting to shift a little bit, at least in my mind anyway, when it comes to quarterbacks. I'm starting to realize just how crucial experience and reps really are. I always knew that was a big factor. I think I'm realizing the more I get into this sport and study the position, God, it's just an enormous factor for just about everybody, especially when I think back to my comments when Jayden Daniels, yes, the Heisman Trophy winner from last season, of course, Missouri fans know him well from the LSU game last year, but now he's the talk of the NFL, basically, and really the talk of the draft. One of the talking points was, hey, this Jayden Daniels guy, he's a heck of a talent, but he's already 24 years old. That's kind of old for a rookie. Has he maybe hit his ceiling? That type of talk. Well, if this is his ceiling, let's just hope it lasts until his early 30s at the very least. As an NFL fan, I'm definitely enjoying the Jayden Daniels stylings right at this moment. But the point is, going back to his time at Arizona State right before he transferred to LSU, well, Missouri was very much on his heels. Eli Drinkwitz definitely wanted Jayden Daniels to be his starting quarterback out of the portal, I would say, in that 2022 offseason. The offseason before the 2022 season. And all the way back then when I evaluated Daniels, I said, man, he is a heck of a runner. I mean, a Brad Smith quality type runner. But when it comes to passing, he's kind of a one read and scramble type of player. And I stand by that evaluation all those years ago. And, you know, there was actually a viral video that accidentally went out the Arizona State locker room, some of his teammates reacting to Jayden Daniels transferring in the spring, and well, they were kind of chuckling and saying, hey, Jayden Daniels is mid, this type of deal. Well, there's no doubt that in his first season with LSU, he made some major strides. And then obviously his second season with LSU, well, he became the best player in college football, and again, now he's the talk of the town. Well, what happened? You could say, well, he proved you wrong and you were an idiot back then and all of his teammates were idiots. Maybe that's true. You can say that he proved me wrong, but what I'll tell you is it took him time to prove me wrong. I just simply think Jayden Daniels got better. Again, I was not questioning the talent back then, and really this isn't about my opinions. This particular thing is about quarterbacks. The biggest thing is you study and study what almost all the success stories have in common is they have time. They have reps. They have a lot of starts specifically under their belt. And I think that's a problem for Anthony Richardson with the Colts right now. Missouri fans will remember him for Florida a couple years ago. He's just an inexperienced player, quite simply. Again, like Jalen Milroe, I would say as well, with Alabama. Again, a guy who's really talented. I thought he was a one read and go type of player last season. Well, he's obviously made some big strides this season, but I would tell Jalen Milroe, if I were advising him, to strongly consider coming back to Alabama for next year. He's only a redshirt junior right now, so he can certainly do that. And really my point of bringing all of this up, and let's bring it back to Missouri, of course. Back in the day, one of my favorite Tigers of all time, Jeremy Maclin, left after his redshirt sophomore season. Just 2 seasons at Missouri, went on to the NFL as a first-round draft pick, and I always thought he made the right decision, and I still do to this day. Gary Pinkel even advised Jeremy Maclin to go to the NFL at the time. He said, if you were my son, and obviously they have a very close relationship even to this day, but he's saying, if you were my son, I would tell you, go get that money. Basically talking against his own self-interest as the head coach of Missouri football. It's a real big thing for Gary Pinkel to have done, in my opinion. And again, while I think that was the proper advice and the correct advice at the time, and in retrospect remains so, I think the calculus changes a little bit at the quarterback position. Now, it's obviously different. You know, if Jalen Milroe, for example, if he keeps playing like this, he'll be a first-round draft pick, almost certainly, if he comes out, I would say. But is that actually the best thing for his professional career? I think it'd be better for the future of his NFL career if he had one more season with the Crimson Tide to grow and learn the position. Just more reps that you simply cannot simulate. Once you're in the NFL, you're in it. There's no more practice at that point. Well, obviously, college football in the SEC is just the next level below that, and that's the place you want to develop as much as you can before going to the highest level. So that's a real discussion. Hey, first round pick, like with Jeremy Maclin, that's real money. That's something to think about. But when it comes to Brady Cook, let's say Brady Cook finishes out this season really strong, makes himself into a potential draft pick. I don't think there's really a scenario where Brady Cook's going to be a first rounder at this point. We can probably agree with that. Could he be a 5th rounder, though? 6th, 7th? Sure, absolutely. I don't think that's a preposterous thing to say at all. But then you have to figure this into the calculus. Is this really Brady Cook's final year in Columbia? Because there is a little bit of question on this. In fact, I asked Brady Cook this offseason about his eligibility. I wanted to just make sure that we were all on the same page here. Basically, in 2021, Brady Cook played in a bowl game that should have made his red shirt impossible to take in that season. Also, the 2020 season didn't count. The point is, there was a whole bunch of questions here. I just asked the man himself via direct messaging on Twitter. Brady got back to me and said, quite simply, 2024 is my last year of eligibility. Notice what he didn't say there, though. He didn't say this is my last year of playing college football. Now, you could imply that. Maybe that's what Brady meant. All I'm saying is, since there's now been a rule change that says, hey, the bowl game no longer counts against the 4-game redshirt freshman limit. I'm actually in favor of that rule change. There's so many opt-outs in bowl games these days. Why not let those young cats get in there? If anything, you'd like to have some actual scholarship players in there instead of walk-ons, that type of deal. But my point is, I do think there's a possibility where this offseason, Brady Cook and Missouri could apply for a waiver for, hey, say, well, you know what, the rule is this now, just because it was different back in 2021, should a current player not be grandfathered into this rule? So my point is, for all the talk of, will Drew Pine be the quarterback next season? Will Sam Horn be the quarterback next season? Or will the Tigers go into the portal? I think all 3 of those options are viable. I really do. Not necessarily in that order, but I could see a scenario where any of those 3 things happen as Missouri's starting quarterback next season. But you know what? I could also see a scenario where not only Brady Cook could potentially go for a waiver there, getting grandfathered in on an old rule, if you will. I think there's potential precedent for that happening here in college football. But also, I think it would make sense for Brady as well. Again, even if he's like a 5th round pick projected, something like that, even if he comes back and that doesn't really affect his overall draft stock, to me, in the NIL world, again, this is different from the Jeremy Maclin days. Brady Cook's doing okay. I don't know what he's making, but it's not nothing. Not like it was in 2008 when Jeremy Maclin played his last season of college football. The world is completely different, and actually, somebody like Jayden Daniels probably would have gone out a year before as well. And does he look like the same player in the NFL? Well, obviously, he doesn't have a Heisman Trophy. We know that. I just don't think he's as good of a player if he doesn't have that time, at least certainly not immediately as a rookie. But again, the real point here is not only is there a potential wiggle room here, a potential rule loophole, if you will, I think, where Brady Cook could potentially come back. If that's an option, I think it makes a ton of sense for both sides potentially. And coming up, in the process of giving what I thought was a lot of respect to the Texas A&M defensive line yesterday, somehow that was taken as an insult by some Aggie fans. Well, the internet is certainly an interesting and unpredictable place, but it did trigger some more thoughts about this Missouri-Texas A&M game, including how there's an unusually wide spread for this game. No, not that kind of spread, a different kind of spread. I'll explain coming up here in just a second. But first, it's time for my Roy Player of the Week. Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Well, this week, I've selected Chris McClellan as my Roy Player of the Week because even though Missouri was on a bye, I think McClellan deserves it this week because of his play really the entire season. He may be the MVP defensively so far, and that's saying something because Missouri's had a lot of really good players on defense this season, but McClellan, he's been everything that old Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators told me he was going to be, and if you has been as impressed by Chris's performance this season, you can show him some love too. Just hop on Roy and throw a few bucks his way, and if everybody pitches in just $10, for example, it adds up fast for Mr. McClellan. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for Chris McClellan and his standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to bring to the Missouri program. Support the players, change the game with Roy. And just to put a quick button on my players sticking around calculus there, this is very specific to quarterbacks. For example, Luther Burden, he should go, obviously. If he's going to be a first-round pick, the Jeremy Maclin, that sort of calculus still remains, in my opinion. It's the Jalen Milroe types, the Anthony Richardson types who are potentially high draft picks that could come back and have more experience in college and still make NIL money, by the way. I think that's where the calculus is starting to change a little bit. But moving on to a different topic, of course, I want to talk about the Aggies, and I had some Aggie fans giving me the equivalent of the "you don't know ball." Oh no, that dreaded phrase. Who could possibly recover from that type of insult? But basically, I said that Missouri, I think that A&M pass rush was so strong, and Missouri has been a little bit spotty in pass protection. Basically, we need to play a balanced game. Don't forget to run the football, and if anything, maybe lean a little bit heavier into the run than maybe Missouri normally would. And also, well, if you expect the deep passing game to come into play, that in particular was my point, because I know Missouri fans want to see that deep passing game start to click. But the way Nick Scourton, who may well be the best pass rusher in the conference, he's certainly up there, maybe one of the best in the entire country. I understand all that. Again, I'm giving him credit. He was basically one of the reasons they won the game. He got a strip sack at the end of the game, that a forced fumble at the very least, A&M recovers. That basically sealed the ball game. Well, Shemar Stewart, another defensive lineman for the Aggies, he blows up that read option play. A&M recovers, short field, easy touchdown. That was basically the ball game. So I'm trying to give these guys credit, and yet, well, Aggie fans thought, oh, well, you think you're going to run the ball against us? Again, I respect the Texas A&M defense, but maybe you guys could calm down just a little bit on thinking that Missouri couldn't possibly get a first down on the ground. Because here's the thing. I realize that Arkansas did not run the ball effectively, particularly effectively with their running backs. I watched every single snap of that game, so I'm not just looking at the box score here. I'm just telling you that was just way too high of a ratio in terms of the amount of times that Taylon Green dropped back to pass. It was probably 4-1 dropbacks versus handoffs, because a lot of those runs were Taylon Green scrambles, by the way. So you can't just look at, and sacks as well. So when he has 13 rushes, you got to factor all of that in as well. Again, I think this is going to be a sort of grind them out kind of game. I don't see this as being a high-scoring affair. It was 21-17, right? A&M over Arkansas this past weekend. I'm seeing a similar type of result this week as well. I think it's going to be a tough kind of physical football game, a game that's going to be won in the trenches. And quite honestly, I just think Missouri is better as an offensive line, as a run blocking unit than Arkansas. So that's not a totally apt comparison, in my humble opinion. I think Missouri has proven so far in this season that it's good at running that outside zone running scheme. It still works. We're still running pretty effectively. I think you'll see Nate Noel get over 100 yards in this game, and if he does, Missouri will probably win the ball game. If not, if Missouri doesn't run the ball effectively, then guess what? If you're right, you Aggie fans out there, then Texas A&M is probably going to win this game, because with that pass rush, if Missouri's getting itself into must-pass, third and long, second and long type of situations far too often, then it probably is going to be a long day for the Missouri offense. Again, I'm trying to give respect to this Aggie front. Now, the Aggie offense, while I think Marcel Reed is a talented player, I think he does a pretty good job of staying in his lane and not turning the ball over from what I've seen for the most part. He's also a solid scrambler and runner as well. He just doesn't frighten me. And neither does Connor Wigman, if he's an injured Connor Wigman, if he's coming back at anything less than 100%. So I don't know. The you don't know ball stuff kind of miss me with that, frankly. I'm trying to give Texas A&M some actual credit here. And here's the thing with Texas A&M and Missouri. Again, I think this is going to be a lower scoring game than maybe people think. So the 48.5 over at FanDuel for that total, I would definitely lean more towards the under here. I don't see this as being a game where Missouri breaks out and scores 35 points or anything, though if they do, that'll be a great sign for the rest of the season. By the way, I was even accused of homerism by one Texas A&M commenter. Gee, buddy, what gave it away? Is it at the that I might be slightly biased toward Missouri? Is it at the 458 mini helmets behind me? Might that have been a minor clue? But objectively, I will just say it is fairly unusual for the spread, no, not the point spread, but the spread between the betting line and the S&P projections to be about a touchdown wide. Now, the spread here, I'm talking about the difference, using a little bit of trading parlance here. In fact, that's what I did all day back in the day, was scalp spreads back on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange floor. But back to the point here is, normally you look at the betting line here over at FanDuel Sportsbook, Missouri a 1.5 point underdog, whereas our guy Bill Conley over at ESPN, his projections S&P Plus have Missouri winning it 29-24. So normally those two numbers are much more closely correlated than that. More often than not, especially in a major game like this between two SEC top 25 clubs, well, you're talking about a difference, a spread there of maybe 2 or 3 points at most. So 6.5 points, that's pretty significant, and it's a reason that I'm favoring Missouri this week. I trust the S&P Plus a little bit more than whatever the national perception is of Kyle Field, Texas A&M, and Missouri, and all that good stuff. Give me the numbers, and give me my gut also that this is a good spot for Missouri this week in terms of the schedule. And coming up, Missouri already has a win against Texas A&M this week on the recruiting trail. Let's talk about Missouri's newest unusually tall football recruit coming up here in just a little bit, and also another positive Matt Zollers update from the man himself. But before we get there, let's talk about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And again, if you're going to want to actually get off to the season with a good start, it's probably not the time to bet on the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm a huge Chiefs fan. For as much of a homer as I'm accused of being, I've been telling you to stay off the Chiefs. Told you against San Diego. Did I just say San Diego? The Los Angeles Chargers. I think I had that one right. So let's stay off the Chiefs. They're 5.5-point favorites this week against New Orleans, but the receiver situation not looking great at the moment. Regardless of what you're into, though, visit FanDuel.com. And it's been a while, but Missouri has another commitment to its 2025 football class, and it is to Dakotah Terrell from Oklahoma, listed as an athlete, though the Tigers are recruiting him as a tight end. And at 6'8", the listing, possibly even 6'9", I've seen this young man listed at in terms of height. That's just unusually tall for any position. And while listed as an athlete, I'm not really sure where else you'd put him other than tight end or possibly left tackle. I can't think of a lot of 6'8" football players, period, other than who was the guy for the former Arizona State quarterback, Brock Osweiler. There we go. The former Denver Bronco. He was famously about 6'8" at quarterback, but that's clearly not Dakotah Terrell's path. But 6'8", 6'9". Hey, your mind immediately thinks red zone target. That's for darn sure. And my mind immediately always goes, well, who else was recruiting this young man? Well, Texas A&M, Missouri's opponent this week among several SEC offers, including Arkansas, Florida, Ole Miss, and the Oklahoma Sooners, his home state. So good to see that all of those teams were kicking the tires at the very least. An interesting player to keep your eye on for the future is Dakotah Terrell. But speaking of the future, obviously we were worried. I was very worried about Matt Zollers' future when online there were images, screenshots of him from his high school game with his foot pointing in the wrong direction. Well, according to Zollers, ultimately it was a fibula break, and he told Brian Doan of 24/7, the 24/7, that's what we're all talking about today, right? Might as well get in a reference to 24/7. But Brian Doan says, according to Zollers says, quote, it is a 3 to 6 month injury. They knew right away after surgery it looked much worse than it actually is. So that's exactly what you wanted to hear there. No real complications or anything like that. It doesn't sound like. Sounds like the surgery went as well as it possibly could. Zollers continues here talking about Missouri's 2024 season. He says, I think overall they're doing well. I think they're just figuring everything out. I think by the end of the season, they are going to be a super tough team to beat. They are going to make the college football playoffs, I think, and I think they can make a big run. So no lack of confidence from possibly Missouri's star quarterback of the future in any way, but I've just been impressed by following him from afar with a few of his quotes, his social media presence. He's just been nothing but positive since what was a really horrific looking injury. Again, really, really pleased, not only for myself as a Missouri fan, but just as somebody with an empathetic heart, just glad to see this young man seems to be doing okay. And hey, 3 months, 6 months, he'll be back. Sounds like if he decides to enroll early at Missouri, spring practice, you never know, could even be a possibility. So we'll see what happens with Matt Zollers and continue best wishes out to him. And best wishes to all of you today who decided to join the podcast. I sure appreciate it as always. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out another knower of ball. It's Spencer McLaughlin, the National Perspective, Locked On College Football on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.